Hi folks, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Payal and I am a traveler who also loves to meet people. And I think a blend of both is where this concept of melting pot has come about. In my Melting Pot series, I will be talking to lots of inspiring people from different parts of the world and also from different cultures, whom I meet during all my travels. The common factor between these folks will be the desire to follow their passion and make it a way of life. So step into this melting pot and enjoy the chats. Hi listeners, welcome to another episode of Melting Pot, a series of conversations, as you already know, with very diverse and extremely passionate people from across the globe. My guest today is Kyle Hegarty, whom I am talking to in Singapore. I mean, the reason why I have this little laugh is because just a second before I started the introduction, I wanted Kyle to let me know how to pronounce his last name. So he has a little story there, which we can share during the conversation. So Kyle and I are, in conversation here in Singapore. He's the managing director of Leadership Nomad and also the author of The Accidental Business Nomad, which I have a copy of right in front of me, personally signed by him. So thank you so much for being a part of Melting Pot and joining me today, Kyle.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
So I think before we get into any further details, I would love to get a little sort of background on your last name.
So the reason why you were giggling during the intro, it's one of my fun facts, which is that I have trouble pronouncing my own name. I don't know. You asked a very good question, which is how do you pronounce your name? And I don't know the correct way to do it, and I never have. I've always been hesitant to say my own name. Hegarty, it's from Cork. My father's from Ireland. And it's spelled a little bit differently than other parts of Ireland. So, but then of course when you go to Cork, every other house has got somebody with Hegarty in it. And so, it's been one of those funny things when people ask, "How do you pronounce your name?" And you tell me.
There's no American way of pronouncing it.
I've been called worse. Let's put it that.
Seriously. So Kyle, when did you move to Singapore?
I came here back in 2006 officially. That's when I moved here. So it's been quite some time. And I was in Boston before that. And I always tell this quick story, which is it was really a business reason that drove me here. I was involved in a very small company in Boston. We were a marketing agency. And essentially we help build sales pipelines for other companies. Company was very small at the time, but I was getting itchy feet. I've always loved travel, and I've always been interested in international areas and ideas. So I just started telling clients that we were doing this work in other parts of the world. I mean, and I would just kind of say, "Oh, by the way, we're doing this in Asia if you're interested, or if there's any projects." And I kind of went fishing for these deals, having no good reason to do it. I had no idea what I was selling.
So your clients were essentially US based?
Mainly US, North American tech companies.
Okay.
And this would have been 2005, 2006. And the Asia story was certainly gaining momentum at that point. Everybody saw the writing on the wall. The growth was crystal clear. Companies were talking about it. Many were here, but many others were talking about it and had no idea what that first step was going to look like. And I had my small handful of clients and just said, "By the way, I'm doing it there." And a number of them said yes right away, which caused me to, in a frantic burst of energy, I had to just get onto a plane eventually, fly over here and start networking and hustling around, trying to meet people, trying to figure out what I was going to do, how I was going to service these accounts that I had committed to. And that's kind of where the book starts, because I'm one of the characters of this book. We'll talk about that, obviously. But
yeah.
And so, it really starts with me in 2005, 2006, scurrying around the region, trying to figure out, okay, we've been doing this in the U.S., how the hell am I going to do this across on the other side of the planet? And what I found was that you can't cut and paste a business model pretty much in any industry, certainly in a services industry, which we were in. And I learned that the hard and in some cases the expensive way.
So do you think it's the culture or the mindset of the people, or so why can it not be a cut and paste model?
There's a whole number of reasons. I came to the conclusion that culture is a big one, and it's one of the ones I think that is, I keep using the word invisible, because I think it's one of those things that's not easily defined. It's hard to see and feel and get a sense of. You can understand legal infrastructure differences, which is a factor as well. There are supply chain differences. There are time zone differences. All of these are things that we can get in front of us. But all of a sudden, some of the things that were catching me up and which catch so many other companies up is the communication style, the way we build relationships, company in a business environment. My company was building sales relationships. And so we had our way of doing things in the US. Pick up the phone, call a stranger, try and convince or persuade him or her to take another phone meeting, sell a deal over the phone. And in many parts of Southeast Asia, which would be much more traditionally relationship-based, to do that cut and paste approach didn't work. It just didn't have the same impact. One. Two, hiring people to try and do that, to try and find people who would sit in a place like Singapore and cold call strangers all day. It's very hard to find Singaporeans who will do that because that's not really the way things are done around here.
And expensive as well.
It's incredibly expensive. Yeah. It's a terrible idea to set up a call center in Singapore, which I learned very quickly. I found myself quickly zipping back and forth between here, Philippines, and India. And that's where we ended up putting a lot of people. But then what you realize is that, there's language differences, there's culture differences in all these countries. One of the big mistakes that I made, I guess I think that American companies and Western companies are guilty, is that they look at Southeast Asia as a market. You hear this still to this day. The ASEAN market has 500 million people in it, or whatever the numbers are, and the growth in this market is. And you hear entrepreneurs looking at, they're trying to get funding. They're saying, well, we think we can get into this ASEAN market. There's no market. It's 10 markets.
Yeah.
Singapore's a market, and it's very different than Malaysia. And Malaysia's a very big place because the Kuala Lumpur region is very different than how you would deal with work in Sabah. It goes on and on. Their next door neighbors are Thailand. There's nothing similar to that. And so what we'd find is that, what I found and what others continue to find, is that this region, I think more than any other region in the world, is more diverse. And that impacts a business growth strategy in pretty extreme ways, or pretty expensive ways, shall we say?
Makes sense.
You get this there, and this growth story, and that's what trickles back to the West over the last 20 years, which is, this is where all of the excitement, this is the action, this is where all the growth is happening, and that's true. But at the same time, it's not. You don't fly over here, open up shop, and everything just starts growing organically the way it does back home.
Yeah.
And that was really one of the big aha moments to have to go through. My business was to take Western companies and help them go through that. So I saw this just repeat itself over and over again, and I ended up writing the book because these patterns still happen to this day. The mistakes are, in many cases, very similar. And I do think it often comes back to that culture piece, that invisible stuff that we started talking about.
Yeah, it makes sense because, for example, India is one country.
Technically, it's one country.
Yeah, similar to the US. But within India itself, every state is like a country.
Way more diverse. That's right.
Very, very diverse.
That's right.
So, yeah.
There's a phrase recently that came out of India, and which was they're talking about internal globalization, and what was meant was that they're trying to promote business within their country. So they're trying to say to their Indian entrepreneurs, okay, we're going to help you with an expansion strategy in India. And we know that it's so diverse. It's kind of a globalization play, but it's just within our borders because it's so diverse. India is a perfect example of just how large and complex one's so-called market actually is.
Yeah. So how did the book come about? Is it more your personal experiences that, what kind of got you into writing?
Well, I guess, so I went through this business journey. I came here alone. It was a one-man shop. We got up to about 45 people, and I needed people in all of these different countries because of the language, because of the differences that we've talked about. So I found myself managing this very diverse remote team back starting in 2007, 2008, 2009. And what I found was that it was incredibly difficult to try and manage this stuff, to try and, in many cases, even with one client, it was like running 7 or 8 clients simply because of all of the differences from a culture, from a structure, infrastructure standpoint, to try and deliver a quote-unquote Asia program because it was that different.
And I think you also would need to, so if you had, for example, a team in Vietnam, you personally would, in order for you to communicate with the company back in the US,
that's right,
you would need to understand the thinking, the mindset. So it was a learning for you, I guess, as well.
Look, I'm my first client when it comes to cross-cultural communication and trying to figure this stuff out. The reason I got into writing it was exactly that, which is say, wait a minute, I'm making all of these mistakes. I'm seeing everybody else make the mistakes. I am having these expat conversations at the end of the week. We go to an expat bar and where everybody's complaining about all this stuff. And I got a little bit frustrated because I felt like the complaints and the conversations weren't changing. The years would go on and it was the same griping and complaining about these challenges. These people don't get it. So-and-so, these guys don't work hard. These guys don't know how to think.
So they were not like digging deeper.
It seemed like it was the same conversation.
On the surface,
And I'm going, wait a minute, so I'm looking around and saying, there are companies that are cracking this code. There are local companies that are killing it here. They're doing really well. And clearly there's something we're missing here. If you go and have these conversations, and it does turn into sometimes people pointing fingers and blaming others, you go, wait a minute, we're actually the problem here, or we're a piece of this. And I think that introspection needs to be dug into a little bit more. That's what I'm trying to do, which is to say, and the first chapter of the book starts in a bar. I kind of jokingly say every good story starts in a bar, but the intent was very deliberate, which was to say, okay, here's your standard expat moment of a couple guys complaining at a bar after work. What's that journey? What's that learning process that we can go through so that we can be better than that? It starts there, but there's got to be a way to be able to become more sophisticated and more advanced in terms of understanding and managing international teams and growing business in international markets.
So when was your book launched?
The timing was perfect. It was it was right in the middle of the summer of 2020 in the US is when it came out. So it was right in the protests where I couldn't fly in to do any of this stuff. The US was really focused on their own internal domestic challenges. The global business story probably, the timing in that in some cases wasn't that good, but we went with it anyway. My argument is that companies and organizations have gone global, but people have not. And even in a lockdown that we're in, where we can't travel anymore, these problems actually are going to multiply because of Zoom, because of Skype, because now we're not just a flight away, we're a click of a button away from managing people in different parts of the world. I've talked to a number of people. They're actually having more international conversations now than they were a year ago. Because a year ago, you'd say, okay, well, let's put this off and we'll fly over there and we'll sort this out next month. Well, now there's conversations have increased. So I launched it in the US over the summer, and then it just launched here in late August.
And what has the impact been? Have you seen a lot of, I know you mentioned that you've been sort of promoting the book, and that's how you're talking to me as well.
Okay, yep.
But I mean, do you think that, I guess it's not short term, right? It's long term, the impact of the book. And so where do you think you are at with the book at the moment?
The word that keeps coming to mind is community. I'm getting the message out there, and I'm finding the tribe, the people that have these challenges, that have had a conversation with somebody in another part of the world. They thought one thing, the other group or side thought something else, and something broke. That can happen in a client situation. That can happen in a partnership if you are expanding into different parts of the world. Even because we're all in such, there's so many different behavior types out there. This is not an international thing necessarily. This is an individual behavior type thing. So I'm looking for people that acknowledge that there are these large but invisible communication and working style differences that are out there. They want to explore that a little bit more detail, have a little bit of fun with it, and then look at tools to be able to overcome it. That's who I'm searching for in my community, in my tribe. The people that have found me and have read this book, and you could it's a wonderful feeling waking up and getting an email from somebody that you have no idea, and they go, yes, this is what I've been looking for. Come speak. Come talk to our team. Come do this. And that's been wonderful. And that's been slowly building up.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah,
so that is something that you're, through your book, you're focusing on, going and sort of talking to people and as a speaker.
Yes.
And are you also, because I read somewhere that you teach as well? You're listening to a fusion of stories recounted for the first time ever by some fascinating people from across the globe with me, Kyle, on this very unique and special podcast series, Melting Pot.
So actually, so I've been doing, I guess, an adjunct lecturer. I'm not quite sure the phrasing, but I've done lecture work as well as coursework through universities here, as well as now in the U.S. One of the things that was interesting, and that's both at a student level, but also at a corporate level. So a lot of the work I'm doing through SMU here is with the enterprises or the corporates.
Oh, okay.
One thing that was interesting was the response has been particularly positive with professors, international relations professors or international business professors in the U.S. who have said, look, there's a ton of material out here. This is a gritty, on the ground, not always politically correct, but very realistic story or series of stories of what it's actually like trying to expand a business into new markets. We'd love you to come in and talk. So that's actually, I think I didn't plan for that, but that seems to be where the tribe has come from.
Wow.
So that's been fun. So I've been doing virtual lectures or talks at universities all through god-awful hours just because of time zone differences.
Yeah.
So yes, you can find me in my home office at 1 a.m. Lecturing people in Seattle, in the U.S.
And you can't you can't say, okay, I'm just going to mute it, or because you're the one who's communicating, right? So like what a lot of the students are doing, those who happen to not be able to go back, especially to the US, because everything at the moment is online. A lot of them have to study at these really ridiculous hours. And so they just, fortunately, it's become a bit flexible in terms of attendance.
Got it. So can they watch recordings?
Yeah, they can watch recordings.
Yeah.
I think or if they want their presence to be felt without actually contributing, they just keep themselves logged on, but they're somewhere else. They're probably sleeping. So it must be tough for you in that sense.
Look, I mean, it's tough for everybody. So I think that...
No, because you have to be be present.
You've got to be on. Now, this is no different than the corporate world of dealing with time zones as well. And as you know, APAC markets, plural, are the ones that get the short end of the stick when it comes to global conference calls. We're the ones who are doing the late night stuff. So in many cases, this was not that different. I jokingly was saying earlier this year that I'm experiencing 2020 jet lag, which is I'm still have jet lag, but it's just because I've been on these weird hourly calls
and not
in the middle of the
because
night.
you're on a plane.
No, so this is 2020 style.
2020 style, I think, has been so. I mean, it's just this year is going to go down in history.
Now, one of the things, to going back to it though, from a if you put a positive spin on this mess, is that I'm getting to talk to 20 or 40 or a couple of weeks ago, a couple of hundred students all scattered throughout the country. I was talking to somebody at a university in Pennsylvania a couple of weeks ago, and then I was in Seattle, all from my third bedroom. And there's incredible opportunities there. I'm going to be doing some talk with 600 attendees from without pants on. There's, to put the bright side of this is that you can get your message out there. You do miss, I think, the face-to-face piece of this. But, we have to work with what we've got.
Yeah. Do you think moving forward, there's going to be a shift in the way companies approach this whole communication?
So good. So I think the way you phrased that question is really interesting, because there's obviously a shift towards remote. Everybody was forced into the remote work right away. Now the response is just so mixed. I mean, if you look at the surveys that are being done worldwide, employees are giving responses across the board. Some absolutely love it, and they're saying, look, I'm not going back. You try and get me to go back, I'm not going. Others want to go back, and it depends on the industry, it depends on the company. Others want a hybrid. A lot of them want hybrids. But then what's that going to look like? I'm working with a company right now headquartered in London, and I think they made a mistake. They just started declaring, okay, we're going to do half on, half off. Here are the hours, figure it out. And different teams are now realizing that they have different needs and preferences. I think that the smarter way to manage this is it's got to be a distributed answer, right? We're in distributed teams. I think we need distributed solutions to this. All of what I'm talking about here is more from a structural standpoint. I think your question was, how's the communication going?
Yeah.
And that's a very different and important question, because I think at the surface level, it goes fine in the short term, but there's cracks that start forming. If you don't have a team that has a solid baseline of trust, it doesn't take much in a virtual team setting for things to go off the rails very quickly. Add the cross-cultural piece to this, where misunderstandings happen more frequently. This increases the likelihood of challenges. So I think that one thing that people need to work on would be, how do you restructure communication to make it so that it fits this 2020 style and probably beyond? There are answers to this, and it's still something that's evolving, but I think that there's a long way to go. Because what's happened for the most part is people went about their business. It was business as usual, just remote. And I think if that was the mindset, that's probably in the long term not going to work. Because it's not business as usual. You click on to a conference call, you don't get the informal communication. You don't get the water cooler chat, the quick conversations on the elevator ride up,
and the contact.
You don't get the same contact. It's a digitally awkward. And then you get everybody staring at this dot, and they're kind of everybody actually nods. This is one of the things they've noticed. Whether they agree or not, people just kind of nod. And I mean, if you watch some of these things on fast forward, it's actually it's funny, but it's kind of creepy. It's just a bunch of people not blinking, staring at this dot, just nodding. You get no feedback or real response, call and response to this. And that, I think, starts adding to problems. So the answers, and a lot of them are things that I think that people don't necessarily want to hear, but it takes a lot more informal one-on-one conversations. And I find that team leaders, actually you could be a leader at any level, the people that initiate those more informal conversations, and you have to initiate it because it's not going to organically happen at the water cooler anymore.
Yeah.
That's like one somewhat easy tip to try and bring a sense of normalcy or better understanding to what's going on. I just sent out I send out a newsletter that goes out once a month, and I sent one out this morning. And one of the ideas was a quarterly audit where you go back and you ask people almost this quadrant of questions, which is, what's something that you're really happy about that you personally did over the last couple of months? What's something that you just didn't get that you were hoping for? What's something that, I don't know, you think you could have done better? What's something you learned? There's variations to this. But I had a company do this, or a team do this, and they started finding out from individuals on the team, look, I've been waiting for this bloody, whatever it was, right? This report. In one case, it was actually a physical thing that had broken and it didn't get fixed. Nobody knew that this particular woman that was the thing that was, excuse my language, this is the thing that was pissing her off more than anything else. And nobody in the team had any idea about it. And there are so many things like that individually we all go through that you just don't see anymore if you're remote. And it's a kind of a weird example, but sometimes you only uncover it when you ask.
Yeah.
And so I think that one of the takeaways from a team leadership standpoint is you've got to have a bunch more questions, targeted, calibrated questions at the ready, and you've got to be almost on like hyper alert to be looking for teammates who may have some stuff that is under the surface that you've got to dig a little bit deeper to find. Put in a culture layer, and that makes it even more extreme because there are some people, both from a culture and individual level, who don't speak up, who aren't going to tell you, and it's going to sometimes take you, 4 or 5 different variations to get to it.
So you probably need, you need to add on another layer of people whose job would be to just focus on, not on a personal level, but just to, as a leader, to be able to bring out.
So I would say, right now many companies aren't thinking about hiring more people right
Correct.
now.
I
think that
the
responsibility,
letting go of people.
Unfortunately, and I think that the responsibility lies on every individual. It's not business as usual, and if you're doing things the same way you've been doing them, something's probably wrong, or something's going to go wrong. And so I think that these are all tools that anybody can add into their tool bag, right? Their kit. Yeah. And it's up to individuals to take the initiative to do it. Tools are one thing, and then actually changing your behavior is another one. I believe, and I'm seeing it a little bit, I think there's going to be a lot more one-on-one coaching opportunities in the next year or so as budgets start hopefully opening up a little bit, because I think that there's going to be a lot of team leaders that realize they need to upgrade these communication approaches. It's not like their styles before were wrong. It's just we're in a different world now, so things need to get adjusted.
Absolutely.
This is stuff that we wrestled with 15 years ago. I'm still wrestling with it. I'm still trying to figure it out. I wrote a book about it. Still trying to figure it out.
Still trying to figure it out. But at least you got to a point where you were able, you crystallized things and you sort of penned them down.
I jokingly say that, there's that historical learning framework. It's a 4-grid framework. I sound like a consultant now. But where you don't know what you don't know. That's the starting point. And then you want to get to that point where you have that aha moment where you probably screw something up and you realize you don't know what you don't know. And it's a really big gap to overcome that, right? Or to go from phase 1 to phase 2. Phase 3 is I'm open to ideas. I realize something's changed here that I'm not used to. And then phase 4 is mastery, which is you've kind of figured this stuff out.
And how long do you think that transition typically would take?
Part of the somewhat hopefully funny stories here is of many people that never got out of phase 1. right? Like they just had the blinders on because they think business is done the way they think it should be done. And those are the men and women who, a lot of these stories are East-West culture clashes. And what you see is companies and individuals rushing into new markets, slamming their approach in, thinking that's going to work, and it rarely, if ever, does. The cases where it does, it's mainly just because they've thrown so much money at it. But more often than not, that going from that phase 1 to phase 2, I think, is such an important journey. And that's one, I'm talking about it in a book from a global business standpoint. It's the exact same idea from now suddenly people working remotely. Same learning process.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Kyle. I've really enjoyed listening to you, and good luck with everything that you've set yourself out to do. Let's see what 2021 has for us. Yeah, but I'm definitely gonna read this book, and I'll obviously share your stories being shared through this podcast. And
I appreciate it.
Happy talking to you.
Thank you. Appreciate the invite again.
Thank you. Can't wait for all you, my listeners, to pick up a copy of Kyle's book, The Accidental Nomad. Would highly recommend reading it. It's so interesting to hear him talk about the approach in marketing that can never be a copy-paste from one part of the world to another. It's always the culture that needs to be the one that people have to be conscious of. Hope you've enjoyed listening to Kyle on this very special podcast series, Melting Pot. Until the next episode, this is Payal signing off.